Wizards may have just changed a long-standing ban and restriction policy. Unbans are back on the menu. Welcome back, vintage gamers, to this reaction video to the banned and restricted announcement on December 16th, 2024. This one has some major implications to vintage, even though no changes. So we see vintage, no changes. Let's go over that first. Let's see what they have to say. They've been providing recently very nice blurbs about how they feel the format is going, what cards they're looking at. And so here we have Dan Musser writing about vintage. Dan Musser is definitely a good player to be writing about vintage. He is frequently in the Discord, seeing what the community is saying. He's active on Twitter. He is, at the very least, has a pulse on what the format is doing right now, and is interested to hear and make vintage the best format it can be. So Dan writes, in our August announcement, we restricted Vexing Bauble and Urza Saga, and have since seen the meta share of Lurrus increase. That is a true statement based on what I have data-wise. Without having to worry about an abundance of colorless mana sources, Lurrus decks have opted to run Psychic Frog instead, consolidating into Dimir and Esper variants. That is true of the controlling Lurrus decks, which are the predominant Lurrus decks in the format. There are a bunch of combo Lurrus decks that are popping up. Lurrus Pio, Lurrus Volkey, and Lurrus Breach decks. But predominantly Dimir and Esper controlling variants. Despite Lurrus taking the largest share, there's still an ample representation of other strategies, and the win rates on the top of the strategies are within reason. I guess we can go take a look and just see how that fares for our challenge data. Obviously, they have more data than we have because league data has been restricted from us. This is our current look since Saga. This is 58 vintage challenges since Saga has been restricted. And we're seeing, if you combine Esper and Lurrus control, you're looking at 500 plays, which is by far the most in the format. And then behind that, we're seeing Dredge, Initiative, and Jewel. And then farther down, Oath, Breach, and Doomsday. Of those decks right now, Blue-Black, Lurrus control, 54% win rate. Esper Lurrus control 52% win rate, probably average them out to a 53% win rate, which is absolutely in line with one of the best decks in the format, but not a broken deck. Typically, WOTC looks at 55% win rate as something where they start to look at, is this deck too powerful? That's just the historical precedent. You can obviously put that line anywhere you want when you're, managing a ban list, but that's what we've been told historically has been the line. With that being said, we have other decks around that kind of 53% win rate. Jewel Shops. This is Breach, Doomsday. And then all of these other decks are pretty close, actually, performing, 49 to 51. Obviously, you don't want to be under 50%, but being this close to 50% is, as the most played non-Lurrus deck, is not that big of a deal. When you start to look further down, most of these not played as much decks are struggling, with the exception of like I said, those Lurrus combo variants. Lurrus Breach, Lurrus Pio seem like they could theoretically be metagame players if they picked up meta share, as well as Lurrus Deathray Shaman. So we're actually seeing three different low play rate Lurrus decks be possible viable candidates to join the top of the metagame. And we even have Bug down here, not the highest play rate, but decent performance as well. So the metagame is definitely consolidating at the top, but having, say you combine the two Lurrus control decks, that's still, maybe 8 or 9 viable decks at the top of the metagame of a variety of different strategies. Obviously, the missing sphere shops, traditional shops at the top of the metagame is definitely something people are sad about. And then obviously losing the other Bazaar decks has definitely made the format feel slightly more narrow, but it's not really that narrow. Like 8, 9 playable decks at the top of metagame with a bunch of brews still lurking about at the bottom is definitely reasonable. And of course, like I said, the win rates here are totally fine. So from a numbers perspective, I agree with what's being said here and agree that there's probably no reason to make changes. They have said, we will keep an eye on how Vintage continues to evolve and monitor the success and play rate of the Lurrus decks. Restricting Lurrus wouldn't accomplish anything, and the bar for being banned in Vintage is very high. An interesting statement because it really pushes the idea that for Lurrus to actually be rebanned from the format, it would need to show a very high play rate and win rate. Right now, it has a high play rate and a reasonably high win rate, but it doesn't have like a ban-worthy win rate. And so, right now we're not looking at a Lurrus ban from the format. You also have to think about, what does a Lurrus ban from the format actually do? Does it accomplish anything? Does it change how the format is? And it's very possible a Lurrus ban is detrimental to the format, as the Lurrus decks are keeping these combo decks in check. When you look at the other decks in the format, Dredge, Initiative, Jewel, Oath, Breach, Doomsday, these are all very much decks that are doing powerful and broken things. Having a high play rate controlling deck that is not combo oriented, with the reduction, with the removal of Saga as a 4 of, these decks are no longer playing Time Vault Key. The only pseudo combo in the deck is sometimes they play Bowmaster Twister. So having your control deck be not very combo oriented in Vintage, I think, is a very good thing. The only thing I would say is I would really like to see decks not always be tied to Lurrus. You're losing out on 3-drop permanents, and I don't really like that part of it. That being said, I'm not 100% sure that you can have a coexisting environment where control decks could choose between Lurrus and not playing Lurrus. Like, usually when you have that kind of line drawn, it's going to be one side is more correct than the other. One side is more optimal. So I'm a little bit skeptical that could even be achieved. Now, how could something like that be achieved without banning Lurrus? Brings me to the main second point of this video, which is a theoretical change in Wizards' stance on managing ban and restriction lists. So previously, in their Play MTG, their video series where they go on the weekly talk show and they talk about their thoughts about ban restrictions, about cards in general, they have previously stated that unbanning is not a high priority for them and it's not something they're actively looking to do. That being said, today's announcement has an incredible shift in the modern ban list. The modern ban list is going to have 3 more things banned, but more importantly, Opal, Green Sun Zenith, Faithless Looting, and Splinter Twin are being unbanned in Modern. This is a major shakeup that makes a lot of sense given the current position of the Modern metagame. Players are upset that it is too Modern Horizon and new set focused and are trying to return to some kind of nostalgic theoretical Modern that they previously enjoyed. That is going to be accomplished here by unbanning some absolute, a couple of these are absolute staples. Some of these have been banned for a very long time, but have, nostalgic feelings involved with them. And so this is driving a very, in my opinion, positive sentiment on Twitter and on other social platforms, that people are invigorated and want to try out this new Modern format. I personally hope that this is a huge success, because unbannings in Modern could say, especially if they're successful unbannings, they reinvigorate some archetypes, they drive more players to the format. If that does occur and it doesn't have sour taste, if one of these end up being format dominating, then this could shift the approach to Legacy and Vintage in terms of unbannings. Previously, we've been getting crumbs of unbannings here and there over the past few years, but if we can show that this is a viable way to draw engagement and positive community support, then we can start seeing more unbannings in Legacy and Vintage. That was actually one of the things that I thought would make a lot of sense for this Vintage announcement, because there are no changes needed. Vintage is not at a point, numbers-wise, where there are changes needed. That being said, these Lurrus decks without Saga don't feel particularly different than the Lurrus decks with Saga, at least in my opinion. And so we are kind of looking at a metagame that has existed for quite a long time. And some players who are extremely invested in the format, who are playing a lot of times on Magic Online, are looking for, something new, some kind of changes. So something that I was thinking was an unrestriction would make a lot of sense to doing a small shakeup of the format, driving engagement to the format as we enter the new mock season. And something that I thought would make a lot of sense would be Narset, Parter of the Veils. This was a card that was restricted in 2019 and was a very different format 5 years ago. Vintage was very much spell-based. In the last 5 years, Vintage has moved very much towards a permanent creature-based format. And so with one, blue decks really opting to play Lurrus, and two, Initiative and other creature decks being prominent in the field, I think the conditions that led to Narset being restricted in 2019 have definitely lessened. This is a card that can be attacked, and this is a card that can't be played with Lurrus. It would maybe, if it was a strong choice, make blue decks pose the question, is it worth it to play Lurrus over Narset plus other powerful 3-drop permanents? Think Monastery Mentor, think Tinker Bolas's Citadel, think Dak Faden, and these kind of cards. That being said, one of those things I just talked about there, Tinker Bolas's Citadel, is one of the reasons you might not want to remove Lurrus from the format. If you were to fully remove Lurrus from the format and these blue decks went towards Tinker Citadel, does that make for a better play experience? Theoretically not. That being said, I think Narset would be one of the ones to try to push towards a question of whether Lurrus is the best choice or not. If that was to be less successful, you could also try Monastery Mentor, which has been restricted since 2017. Now, that is definitely a more risky and controversial choice. Mentor was an extremely powerful part of the format. Basically, all the blue control decks and the blue combo decks were using it as the finisher. And it can do some really crazy things in terms of stalling board states and tokens. So that would be like a little more risky, but that would definitely be a call towards, is Lurrus the best choice for every deck? There are other things to think about. Sphere Shops, unfortunately, since the restriction of Saga, has performed extremely poorly. Sphere Shops was actually one of the stronger decks in the Urza Saga metagame because they got to play the Sagas and they got to play the Vexing Baubles, and they were actually very good against the opposing Lurrus control decks. Now that they don't have these same tools, they actually struggle very much against Frog and the Lurrus control decks, and so they've fallen off. A card like Thorn of Amethyst might make sense to be removed. Lots of artifacts are currently on the ban list from a time where Mishra's Workshop was dominating the metagame, and not like Lurrus right now dominating, like higher play rate, much higher win rate dominating the metagame, and they did that for years. So things to think about. There are a lot of other cards on this restriction list that are not seeing any play. Things like Windfall, things like Memory Jar, what's the Library of Alexandria. There was another one, Channel, and Imperial Seal. So there's a bunch of cards that may theoretically have no impact in the metagame, but I truly believe that an unrestriction or unbanning that doesn't actually impact the metagame but drives engagement is an overall positive. I think using unbannings and unrestrictions to drive engagement to a format is a tool that we can do to help revitalize and bring players in to these extremely fun old formats that probably don't see as much play. Now, I'm not going to go through this whole list and say each and every card. I've done that in previous videos. Maybe we'll make a video again. But I just want to say that I am super hopeful for this modern unbanning announcement, because it could definitely lead us to a place where we start getting more frequent legacy and vintage unbannings. And I think that would be a great thing for the format, especially in terms of player engagement and player growth. What do you think about this modern unbanning announcement? Do you think that vintage is in a spot where it's time to get a couple cards off the ban list? Let me know in the comments below as we return to gameplay videos Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. I'll see you then.